Hi everyone, my name is April. We're gonna start in about 5 minutes, so hang tight, and thanks for coming.
First two was spread over.
I can move it, right?
Yeah, that's just what you can do today.
Okay, we're starting, you guys.
Hi everyone, my name is April. We're gonna start in about 5 minutes, so hang tight, and thanks for coming.
Are you on? This is on. I am so nervous about this quiz that we're having.
It's recorded.
I'm happy.
You'll be fine.
Okay.
Please. Good
Are those handouts?
Yeah, this is the webcam, so you can't just but I guess I did just do it.
This is supposed to be my car.
Can you just
I'll figure it out.
take the pictures with
One more. Just one more.
Are you guys familiar with IPA? Are you familiar with IPA?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just want to Hi everyone. Again, my name is April. I'm the director of the TESOL programs, and I'm going to introduce Dr. Ciancio. Here's a little bit of her biography. She's lived in, she has 20 years of experience. She got her master's and Ph.D. from Brazil. She's lived in Brazil for about 13 years, and she also lived in India for about 3 years. And throughout her whole experience, she's in the TESOL field. She taught a lot of English language learners, and she also did a lot of curriculum development and also teacher trainer. Okay, and here's Dr. Ciancio.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Nice to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so today we're going to talk about pronunciation and using the IPA symbols, the International Phonetic Alphabet, for teaching pronunciation. Before I start and jump into it, I'd like to know if you have any experience with IPA. I always like to know who my audience is, so we can always tailor make the content according to the audience. So, do you guys have experience with IPA? Nothing at all. Completely new to you. Okay, good. Great. Well, that's my ideal audience, actually, because that's what I was looking for. My feeling is that two things. First of all, I think that we neglect the teaching of pronunciation in class, and I think that it needs to be an integral part of teaching. It's as important as vocabulary and grammar is. But I think that frequently we get so focused on the curricula that we need to cover that we tend to forget pronunciation, because generally it's not required, it's not going to be covered on the test. However, in speaking, it's something that we perceive. And so subconsciously we're making notes to ourselves that perhaps this student isn't quite as clear as we would like them to be, or we tend as humans to make subconscious judgments of people based on their pronunciation. So sometimes people are very intelligent and have a lot to communicate, but because they are ESL or because they have a pronunciation variety, sometimes we assume that they're not as intelligent as we think. We don't quite give them credit. So there's a lot of subjective judgment that goes on. So it's very important to just be aware of that, to be aware of the fact that we tend to make those judgment calls as people, as humans. It's just typical. It's a normal thing that we do. But being aware of what we do is very important, and that's the first step. So that kind of goes on into my second point of bringing pronunciation to the awareness of the student. If they're never taught pronunciation, they'd never consciously monitor themselves. They're just not aware that they're making these mistakes. And I say mistakes in quotes because there is a lot of subjective judgment about pronunciation in terms of what's right. What is the standard that we should teach, right? Even here in the US, we have a lot of pronunciation varieties, right? The accent in the South is very different from the accent in the North or on the East Coast. And so we can kind of know something about somebody based on their accent, right? We can perceive, oh, you must be from the South, you know, make some associations, and so make some assumptions about what that person's background might be. So a lot of that goes on under this, right, under our level of perception. When we're teaching English language learners, are you familiar with the concept of fossilization? Have you heard of that? So what does fossil remind you of? What does that word remind you of? So we can be interactive, please. You know, we're taping here, but feel free to jump in and correspond. When I do lectures, I really like them to be practical. I really like to meet the needs of the audience. I don't want to just be a talking head and talking about what my experience is and what I know, so I want it to be applicable to your world and what's interesting and relevant for you. So in terms of fossilization, what does fossil bring to mind if you're thinking of language acquisition?
Something old and ingrained.
Exactly. Are fossils hard or soft?
Hard.
Very hard, right? They're rocks, right? So she said something ingrained, right? It's stuck. So when we talk about fossilization and second language acquisition, we're talking about somebody who gets kind of stuck. Have you ever seen that with somebody where they're learning a language and maybe they've been acquiring English in our case, which is what we're focusing on. Maybe they've been acquiring English for the last 10 years, but they never kind of get beyond a certain level, right? They might make the same kinds of mistakes chronically, like say something like, when did he went? Something like that, right? So it just happens naturally, and they don't even think about it anymore because they've been doing it for so long. So they get stuck, and it's not part of their perception anymore. That's what it means to be fossilized. So it can happen in all areas of language acquisition. It can happen in grammar and in vocabulary, and it happens in pronunciation too. And so the problem is that we run the risk of allowing our students to become very fossilized in pronunciation because they usually receive very little input from the instructor about how to correct it, right? They get input about vocab, they get input about grammar. We make corrections when they make mistakes when they're speaking. When they make grammatical mistakes, we tend to correct those right away. But when students make pronunciation mistakes, we rarely bring it to their attention. So they don't notice it, so they don't improve, okay? So the idea of using IPA symbols, so IPA stands for International Phonetic Alphabet, and that's what we're going to be looking at today, and that's what's in your handout. So this is my preferred form of phonetic symbol to work with. There are several different types of symbols to use. So you may find that when you refer to a dictionary that they use slightly different symbols. There's about 5 different symbol systems. I prefer this one. I think that it's the clearest. So there are some others, so be aware of that you may see ones that we're not going to cover here today. Okay, so it's just a different system, but it does the same thing. So we're going to be working with IPA, the International Phonetic Alphabet. The symbols, I think, are not used frequently by English language teachers because they look a little bit overwhelming. It's scary, right? It looks like you're going to study Russian or Greek or something like that, right? So you look at this and think, wow, whole new language. This is kind of hard, and it's going to take a lot of time to delve into. So I'd like to present it to you in an easy, fun way that is less intimidating, that's easier to use with your students. Because if we as teachers feel intimidated by this content, you can be sure that your students do, right?
Yes.
So if you can present it to them in a fun, interesting way, then hopefully you'll feel a little bit better about it, and then so will your students, right? So if you would like to look at the first page in your handout, we have a very large chart. This should be the first page. So this large chart here is the entire International Phonetic Alphabet for English. There are other symbols. IPA can be used for all languages that are spoken around the world. So there are other symbols that we won't cover because they represent sounds that we don't use in English, okay? So these are all of the sounds in the English language, okay? So if you look at the chart, what we have here is this first quadrant. In the upper left corner are all of the vowel sounds. And this other quadrant here on the other side are all diphthongs. Anybody know what a diphthong is? What is it?
It's two vowel sounds placed right next to each other.
Exactly. So we have two vowel sounds that will occur in the same syllable. Syllables in English are recognized by vowel sounds. So each time you have a vowel sound, you have one syllable. In a diphthong, however, we have two vowel sounds, but they're merged together, right? They can also be called a glide. So a diphthong can also be called a glide because you glide from one vowel sound to the other. So it occurs inside one syllable. It's a movement of your mouth. And we'll get into the movements and how to make these different sounds in a moment. Up here you have some arrows in the top right corner. So this can be used to work with intonation. So you can show your students that you want the intonation to go up or you want it to go down. We can also use it to work with the glides to show which direction the mouth glides, how it moves. We'll get into that in a minute. I'll explain it to you. And then down below, what do you think we have? What's the bottom part? The large part of them. These are all the consonant sounds, right? So first of all, how do we differentiate a consonant from a vowel? What's the difference? Do you know? A consonant sound from a vowel?
Would tend to not change
Okay.
with vowels.
What do you mean by change?
There's long and short.
Okay. We don't have long and short consonants, true. Okay. Any other thing?
With a vowel, there's a freer flow of air.
Correct. Okay. Yeah, that's the major difference. So with a vowel, we generally don't have any obstruction. So there's no obstruction to the airflow that comes out through your mouth. Whereas with the consonants, there is some type of obstruction to the airflow. So with the vowels, we have different degrees in the ways that our mouth moves. So then if you want to move to the next chart that you have in your handout, this is the vowel chart. So this is just a close-up of what we saw in the upper quadrant in the large chart, right? So the large chart was complete, and this is a full out of that. So here we have all of the vowel sounds. The symbols, each symbol represents one sound. So it may not correspond to a specific vowel in the language, right? The vowels are A, E, I, O, U, right? But sometimes a symbol will be spelled differently. So that's a very important distinction to make. This is not spelling. It's like a map. It's like when you see a lake on a map, right? It's not the actual lake. And this isn't the actual letter. It's a representation of how to make that sound, okay? So the way this chart works is that we can imagine that this chart is inside our mouth, okay? And so this is going to be the back of your mouth, and this is the front of your mouth. So let's imagine here we've got our lips here, right? And we've got our teeth here. We've got our tongue down in here, right? Okay, and here's where the vowels are inside of your mouth. So these are what we call back vowels, and these are front vowels. With the back vowels, the back of your tongue is slightly raised. That's what's going to cause a change in the airflow. So by the shape of our tongue and by the shape of our lips, we change the way that the air comes out of our mouth and therefore makes a different sound. With the front vowels, the tip of your tongue is generally higher in your mouth, okay? And with the mid vowels, of course, the middle part is raised more. All right, so we'll practice this in a minute so that you can feel how it moves. The next aspect to notice is that these on the bottom row are what we call low vowels, and these are high vowels. So there's degrees to the amount that you can move your tongue to. You might raise it slightly, or you might raise it midway, or you might raise it very high in the back. And you can do the same with the front. Of course, our jaw can move a little bit too, right? It can go down, and so that can help your tongue to go lower. The other aspect to pay attention to on the chart is our lips. So our lips can move from smiling and being very wide and tight to becoming neutral, to becoming rounded, making a little circle. So let's go through these sounds, and I want you to pay attention to where your tongue is raised in your mouth and your lips and how they move. Okay? So 1 minute, I'm going to get some water and take a little drink before we start. And April's going to be monitoring our online audience. We've got an online audience too, and so if they have questions, be sure and let me know, okay?
We have about 9 viewers.
Okay, great. So online people, be sure and send us your questions if you want me to stop or repeat, if you can't hear, if there's something you want me to go over. And you guys as well, okay? Feel free to jump in and let me know. So you have some example words down here at the bottom, right? So you can see some words are made with that sound, all right? So what we'll do is let's kind of go across the top vowels first, so you can feel how your tongue is high in your mouth and how it kind of moves from being the tip high in your mouth to the back of your tongue being high in your mouth, okay? So the first one we have are words like beat. So repeat. Beat.
Beat.
Can you feel the tip of your tongue kind of up high? Beat, beat. From the tip to about the midsection, right? Beat. And then one other thing to notice is that sometimes we have some pairs between long and short vowels. As you mentioned, that the consonants tend to be the same length, right? Whereas vowels change in quality. They can be long or short. So we have some pairs. So this symbol here, these 2 little dots afterwards, are what we call a diacritic. And a diacritic provides a little bit of extra information. It's like an accent. You know, if you study Spanish and you know that like N is N, but if you put the tilde on top, it makes a nasal sound, right? And you get N. So a diacritic is an extra information like an accent. It tells you a little bit of a change. So these 2 dots afterwards are a diacritic that indicate a long vowel. And long vowels mean that we're going to hold them a little bit longer, right? Their duration is long. The next one is a short I sound. It's generally represented by the letter I, although not always. So sometimes we get a little bit where we overlap and we're talking about the symbols. So we're saying this is a long I sound and this is a short I sound, but that's not completely accurate, okay? Because as you can see in our examples here, the first word beat is spelled E-A, right? So it's E is the sound actually, okay? So it's long. And one thing that we can do is we can get what we call minimal pairs. Are you familiar with those?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So we can have 2 words, and you just change one sound. And so we can contrast them and see. So we can say something like beat, and what would be the pair? Is beat long or short?
Long.
Long. E, it's the sound that we're working with, right? So what would be the short I sound?
If.
Bit, exactly. Right? I, I, beat, bit. Okay? So
What is like I for like kite?
kite. That's a diphthong actually. I. Okay?
Why wouldn't, I'm curious, like why we have the E and the I, but not the I on this chart?
Oh, okay, so this I is a, it's a diphthong. We could do a minimal pair with that. We could say beat, bite, right? That would still be a minimal pair, but we would be contrasting 2 different vowels. Beat would be the long I sound, and bite would be this sound I. So we could do a minimal pair like that and contrast these two sounds. Beat, bit, contrast e, I, and beat, bite, contrast e, I.
So I guess my question was clear. I'm asking why is there no symbol for that sound?
There is, that's on the diphthongs, and we'll get to that in a minute.
We haven't got
We haven't gotten that far. Diphthongs are a combination of two vowel sounds, so let's get the single vowels down first, and then we'll move on to the diphthongs.
Minimal pairs, tell a little more about it, where it came from. I mean, like maybe I wasn't paying attention, but all of a sudden I saw minimal pairs on the board. So.
Okay, so a minimal pair, what it means is that you can compare two words, and the only thing that changes, the minimal thing that changes, is one sound.
Okay.
So it's a way for us to hear the difference. The words, everything, like if we were to write this in phonetic transcription, we could put B, E, T, right? So it's beat. And we haven't gotten into consonants yet, but I mean, these ones are pretty obvious because they look like the letters they represent, right? And bit would be phonetically transcribed like this, bit, right? When you do transcription, you usually put it in brackets like this to show that it's pronunciation. So the one thing that changed here was this vowel sound. So it's a minimal pair, it's a pair because they're the same except for one sound. And if you change that one sound, you change the meaning of the word entirely, right? So this is a common place that students have trouble. Like sometimes they want to say sheet and they say sheep or something like that, right? So they want to say, I put the sheep on the bed, right? And so they make a mistake, and it can lead to miscommunication because they changed one sound. So it can be an area of problem. And the minimal pair is also a way to practice specific sounds so that you can increase awareness about it. Okay? Any other questions so far? All right, so let's continue moving through the chart. So sorry, I had to give a little, kind of like stop and give a little bit of background information so we could do it. So let's just make these two sounds and feel the difference. Feel the longer vowels tend to be tense. So we said that we have long and short vowels, right? And the long vowels tend to be tense, and the short vowels tend to be lax. Lax means soft, right? Kind of like relaxed. So your tongue is a little bit softer in your mouth. Your tongue is a muscle. It's a complex muscle, right? When we said here with the chart in our mouth, you can tense part of the muscle, you can tense the front part, you can tense the blade, which is the sides of your tongue. So if you're looking down on your tongue, this is the tip, this is the back, and this is what we refer to as the blade. So sometimes there's some sounds we make, like for example the R sound. When you say like ruler, ruler. Can you feel how the sides of your tongue come up? It curls kind of like a little, right? Say it 1 minute so you can dance. Ruler, ruler. Can you feel it? Yeah? So it's a very complex muscle actually, right? There's a lot that can move there. The sides, the back, front. Okay? So, beat. Say it. Beat.
Beat.
Bit.
Bit.
Can you feel the difference in tense and lax? Beat. Your tongue is really like flexed, right? It's spread out flat and tight. And bit. Soft, right? Beat, bit. Now feel the difference in your lips. Beat, bit, right? They go from smiling to more neutral. So even your lips are kind of tense, and then they relax a little bit too. Okay? So that all changes the quality of how the air moves through our system and changes the sound. All right? So let's move back in our tongue toward the back of the mouth, and we'll look at another set of sounds that are similar. So we have two sounds that are similar to you, right? So we have a word like put, pull, push, book. So is this tense or lax? This one is lax, right? You can feel it, your tongue is soft, and we don't have a diacritic showing us that it's long. Okay, so we have symbol information that helps us with that. Then let's move back a little bit and say these words. Food, soon, loose, rude. Can you feel the back of your tongue a little bit tensed? So it's kind of like a muscle back here, right? That's kind of flexed up in the back, right?
And the lips are tense as well.
They are, aren't they?
Well, they're more round shape.
Exactly. So as we go through this chart, let's see. So let's say this is the vowel chart that we've got here, right? And we said that these were high vowels and these are low vowels on the top and the bottom. And we had front and back vowels. What happens with the lips is as we go around the chart, here in the front, we're going to be smiling with our lips. And as you kind of go down and around, the tense smile becomes more and more relaxed until it becomes very round. So when we get all the way back here, like Cherise noticed, our lips are like this, right? So they start in a smile, and at the end, it's like you're blowing bubbles or you're going to whistle or something, right?
I just noticed there's a cheese in there. Like taking a picture, say cheese.
Cheese!
We can also say key or something.
Right, you could, right? So why do we say cheese? Because we want you to, right? Yeah, exactly. So we want your lips to go apart. So let's say these last sounds here at the end and pay attention to the tongue being tight, the lips being rounded, and the back of the tongue being raised. Okay? Food, soon, loose, rude. Right? Do you feel your lips? So, then we'll move down and look at the next line, okay? So on the next line, at the very beginning, we have the sound that, or the symbol that represents the sound eh, eh. So this one, we're going down a little bit in our mouth. So let's look at a contrast here from the top to the mid to feel how the tongue goes from high to mid. So if we say beat, bed. Right? Can you feel it go down a little bit? Yeah. Beat or beat, bet. Beat, bet. Your lips come in a little bit too, right? Yeah, because we said as we go down and around, they start to become more neutral. So this refers to the lips, okay? So let's say these sounds and feel where they are. Bet, left, men, yes, said. So even though it's spelled A-I, the sound is eh, right? Okay. So the next one is the only one that really has a name. Do you know the symbol? The next one? Schwa. This one is called Schwa. The other ones don't really have a name, so we have to say it's the eh sound, right? This one is the Schwa. It has a name. And it has a name because it's the most common vowel sound in English. We frequently find this sound. It's a very, very neutral sound, as you can tell by its position on the chart. It's neither high nor low, neither front nor back. Lips are neither spread nor rounded. It's just right in the middle. Very easy and simple. Yeah. So this is what we call the Friday afternoon sound. Right?
How do you spell schwa?
Schwa.
S-C-H-W-A.
So this one is schwa. Okay? So if you have like the, about. So about, how many syllables do we have in the word about?
2.
2. How do you know?
Vowels.
We've got two, yeah, So we've got two vowel sounds. Right? Be careful, it's not two vowels, because sometimes vowel sounds spelled with two vowels, like we saw before in loose. Loose has two O's, but it only has one sound. Therefore, it only has one syllable, right? Okay? So about, we have two. So we're saying that vowels are represented by there's no real obstruction to the airflow. And what we mean by that is that the tongue or the teeth or the lips don't stop the air from flowing through your mouth. They change the quality of the way that the air moves through. It will restrict it a little more when your lips get very rounded, right? Or when your tongue gets very high. But it doesn't actually stop the air. Like when we say the letter P, right? When we say P, P, our lips stop the air, right? They stop at our lips. So you can determine how many syllables a word has by putting your mouth and your hand under your chin and feeling how many times it moves. This is the easiest way to check. So about, we've got two, right? How many syllables in the word education?
4.
Education, right? Education. Can you feel it move?
Yes.
So this is the easiest way to check. Each time your jaw moves, it should be a different vowel sound. Okay? Yeah.
I was just thinking about the obstruction with the airflow. Some of my students saying ng, not ing, but ing. For some reason, some of them get stuck on that. And it's hard because I think my students want to open their mouth, or they want to do something with it, and it's just like ing, but they just get stuck on that ng when they look at it in reading, because they want to, open their mouth more and say, put an extra vowel in there, and there's no vowel between N and G. It's just,
Can you give me an example in a word?
well, with my second language learners, Spanish is their primary language. There's all kind of strange things that they can do with letters and sounds, but just with the opening and the closing of the mouth, I think that's a different way for me to present it to them, to let them see more of my mouth and the movement, and maybe with the tongue to show them that it's natural when you say the ing or the ing, that you don't have to keep opening your mouth.
How many vowel sounds do we have here in this suffix?
1.
There's only one, right? So there's only one movement, right? There's only one vowel, only one movement. So the way that we would transcribe this is with this short I sound that we were looking at, right, when we saw this. And right? And then this is represented by one consonant sound. So we haven't gotten to consonants yet, but because she brought it up, there's a symbol that looks like this, and it shows that we have a nasal sound. So if you say ing, like say singing, what part of your tongue is raised? The back of your tongue is very high in your mouth, isn't it? Right? So this is a nasal sound. It's nasal because the air is coming out of our nose, right? Sing. Your tongue is so high in the back of your mouth that it obstructs the air from coming out through your mouth, and it comes out through your nose.
Well, they like to put an A at the end of it. That's it.
Singa.
Yeah, they'll put an A at the end of ng. Yeah.
Sometimes what happens is that in other languages, sometimes they don't end a word on a consonant sound. And so they feel like they need to add another vowel sound to the end, right? Because it's awkward for them. It's unusual. In their language, they never end it on a sound like that, right? In English, we only have this sound at the end of words. We never put it at the beginning. We don't have nya something, right? But in other languages, you do, right? So it's very hard for us to make this sound at the beginning of a word if English is your first language.
Can I make a comment, not being any that expert in linguistics?
Of course.
It seems to me like the biggest change between English and most other languages is that English is gender neutral, and other languages have a masculine, feminine, especially in Spanish where it's the O or the A.
Right.
And so that's how they delineate between whether they're talking about a sister or brother,
Uh-huh.
father or mother.
Right.
It's the O and the A.
Mhm.
So to them, I think they're having trouble understanding the concept of like, this is just, you have two different words
Mhm.
for two different things, not just
Mhm.
the same word with the O or the A on the end.
That's
Right.
a good point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
there's been some-
That probably happens a lot.
Yeah.
And so they're wondering, how do I distinguish that
Right.
I'm referring to a male? So they feel like they need to add that extra information.
Yeah,
English
that's
doesn't
a
require it.
conceptual misunderstanding rather than like a pronunciation.
Right.
issue.
So we were taught last week it's a distribution problem, right? Distribution of sound.
Right, right. So they're, based on the distribution in their first language,
Mhm.
they're trying to use a similar pattern in the second
Second
language,
language,
right?
yeah.
Mhm. So this causes some issues, right? And it can cause some problems with pronunciation and with communication. Which brings me back to a very, very important point about why to study pronunciation, why it's so important. When a baby is born, physiologically, if the baby is healthy, they have the ability to recognize any sound in any language. So if they're exposed to Chinese, they will understand Chinese as they grow up. If they're exposed to Spanish, they will understand Spanish as they grow up, because they, after a certain period of time, lose the ability to distinguish sounds in languages that they are not exposed to. So when we're born, we have this natural capacity to perceive all of the sounds. With time, your exposure has been limited, and therefore you lose the ability to even perceive that difference. Imagine how strong of a statement that is, right? So there you are, correcting your student, correcting them. They don't even hear it. They can't hear the difference. They haven't been exposed to it. They don't have the neurological pathways built in their brain in order to perceive that sound. Okay? Here we're talking about how to produce the sound, how to make the sound, right? There's a whole nother area that studies about how sounds are perceived and how they are coded or decoded inside the brain. Okay, so it's very important to have repeated exposure to the different sounds so that students are able to build those neural pathways and then be able to perceive the sound. So just doing a little bit of pronunciation here and there every once in a while, do you think you're going to make much difference? Not really, right? So it's something that needs to be consistent, needs to be consistently taught. So I would like to encourage you to try to incorporate it in your lessons, and we'll get to some ways to do that later. But you know, if you can have the sound of the week, or when you're presenting new vocabulary, you identify certain areas that you know that your students are going to have trouble with, right? So you say you know from your experience with your students that these guys are going to have trouble with this sound, so we're going to do a little bit of extra work on it. Okay. So here in the middle, we were talking about the schwa, and we had about, the, right? And then next to it, we have another symbol. What's the first thing that you notice about this symbol? What do we have there? We have the diacritic that indicates what? A long vowel, right? So these two sounds are basically in the same place in the mouth. They're neutral right in the middle, right? So it's basically the same sound. However, this is the long version of schwa. Okay? So this is stressed, and this is unstressed. Remember when we talked about tense and lax? That's another word that we could put up here. So, stressed. So we can talk about that when we talk about syllables, right? We talked about, and we said about had two syllables in it, right? And so we usually have one syllable that's stronger than the other, right? So in the word about, we said we had two syllables. We would divide it here, right? Which syllable is stronger? About, right? The second one. So you can indicate this using another diacritic, and they put a little, like a little dot up here. Back on your very first chart, where we looked at where we had the entire chart and we have the arrows, right? Where we could show that a sound goes up, I, or we could show that intonation rises. These little dots here are another type of diacritic that can be used to show syllable stress. So that's what that means. If you see that in a dictionary, this is the stronger syllable, all right? So about.
So in this box, there are two different symbols, the dots and then the X's.
Yeah, well, actually, the X's, so we have several different ones. We have a rising sound, we have a falling sound, we have a flat sound, and we have the diacritic up above that shows sentence stress, and the one down below shows secondary stress. So we looked at the word education before, remember? Education. And we said it had how many syllables? 4, right? So where would we break it? Education. Is that okay?
Yes.
Yeah? All right. So what's the strongest syllable there?
CA.
Education, right? This is the strong one. So this one we would indicate with this diacritic. And is there one that's not quite as strong as K? A little bit less strong? U. Education, right? So we can designate this one with secondary, right? So this one has the primary stress, and this one has the secondary stress. So you may see this in dictionaries that show phonetic transcription, right? Or they'll show you where the primary stress is and secondary stress. A good way to represent this that I like to show to students is with balls of different sizes, right? So we've got education. It's about the same, right? Education, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty close. There are, theoretically, 5 different levels of stress. However, after the second one, it's kind of hard to perceive the difference, right? And a lot of detail. I don't know if we have to get into that much detail, but those are about the same size, maybe a little bit smaller, right? But the important thing is that this is the strong one. And this one's pretty weak, right? Okay? So the schwa sound, about, we said that that was our first sound in this word, right? About. This one is stressed. So you never find schwa in a stressed syllable. It's always in an unstressed syllable, okay? If you get the sound in a stressed syllable, it will be represented by this symbol. Okay, so this one is stressed, and this one is unstressed. So we can put this one here. Okay. So if you go to the word that we have, the words that we have in this square of the chart. So we have bird.
Hold on a second, I'm sorry. I think you said that the schwa is always
Unstressed. Oh, I switched them. Thank you.
Sure.
Catch me if I'm, yeah, sometimes it's hard to write and talk at the same time, right? Thank you. So schwa is always unstressed. So if we go back and say these words that say bird,
Bird.
burn,
Bird.
purse.
Bird.
Okay. Frequently, this sound is followed by R, although not always. Okay. There's another diacritic that you can use to show the R sound. You can put like a little flag on the back of it. Okay. So bird. So we could represent the word like this. Bird, the sound of it. Okay. So that's our vowel sound. We have one vowel, one syllable. All right. Then moving back, we have another long vowel sound, right? And we have a word like bored, torn, horse. Can you say these and feel where your tongue is? Bored, torn, Horse.
Horse.
Can you feel that the back of your tongue is raised?
Yeah.
But not as high as in that long U sound, right? That's another way of making this distinction. Is what did we have? Long and short we had up here, right? So let's make some contrast between top and mid now so we can feel the difference. So you had like food and board. Can you feel the back of your tongue come down a little bit? Ooh, or ooh.
It's like your lips are
or.
doing the same thing, but the tongue is doing something different.
Exactly, exactly. Because our lips are still over here, right? They're still really rounded. But the back of the tongue has come down a little bit. Then on the bottom line, so these ones are low in your mouth. They're really open, okay? So at the beginning, we have this. This is also kind of a long sound. It doesn't have a diacritic, but it's kind of long. So we have something like hat, man, gas.
Gas.
Can you feel how low your tongue is in your mouth? Ah, ah. You really need to open your mouth. So you're not smiling anymore, right? We're not up here. Now we're down here. Ah, ah. Okay, so it's really low. Your mouth is kind of more neutral. It's not rounded. Your lips aren't rounded. But it's very low, so it's not smiling either. And then we have a shorter sound like but, some, rush, and what does that say? Does, thank you. And then moving a little further back, we have another long sound. So like far, card, father, okay? So it's pretty open, but the back of your tongue is slightly raised. Can you feel it? Father, okay? But your mouth is open, your tongue is low, but the back is a little bit up. This very last sound is a sound that's found in British English, but we don't have it in American English. So it's a low back rounded vowel. So your lips are rounded, the back of your tongue is high. So they would say something like cross, right? Pot, right? So in British English. American English, we don't use this sound, all right? We don't have it. Which brings me to another interesting point, is that almost all of the pronunciation material that I find, especially that using IPA, tends to be British. So be careful, because the transcription is frequently how it's said in British English, so it may be different. My favorite pronunciation dictionary, do you have it? Which one is that? Yes, that's it. Can I show you?
Yeah.
Do you mind? So I love this pronunciation dictionary. This is the Longman pronunciation dictionary. And I don't know if this one has it, but does it have the American and British form? I had a larger version, so I don't know if this one does. But the one that I had was wonderful because it first showed the American variant, and then it showed the British variant, and then it showed other variants. So like in Australia, they might say it a little bit differently. So they would show all the different variations. It was a really nice pronunciation dictionary. So just be aware that frequently the transcription shows a British pronunciation. Okay, so as you become more familiar with the symbols, you'll be able to perceive that.
Is that the only symbol that you would associate with the British pronunciation on this whole chart?
Yes.
And does it vary with stress also? Could it vary, do you think, with British?
Does it vary with stress?
The stress, where they
Yeah.
have the stress in words?
It does.
Yeah.
Try and think of an example. Can you think
Well,
of
I
one?
actually looked up education,
Mm.
and it does show the stress with the
Education. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. We say it on the ka. Do you agree with me? Education. We, I mean, in general, right? As we talked about at the very beginning, there's lots of variations. So, yeah, it can happen. And when you change the stress, it can change the quality of the vowel.
In
Right.
English, also, like they say their words in like a softer manner, like a slower, softer manner. I don't know how to
Is that your
say it.
perception?
Yeah, I mean,
In British English?
I mean, I did theaters and I did like practice different accents and things like that. So it's like it was like pod and pod. So I'm saying you're doing like it's more of like I don't know, there's more flowing to it, even when like the harder sounds. So it's doing education.
Right.
Like I went to college in Wisconsin, education, or like education, or education.
Uh-huh.
You know, so they kind of make it flow more.
Right. Students tend to say that they think that British English is easier to understand than American English. And we tend to cut the syllables a little bit and run words together, especially when you get into sentences. We're talking about words in isolation, right? But when you say something like, how you doing? Right?
Well, yeah, because like British English is just a combination of Latin and Germanic, and American English is a combination of French, Latin, and Germanic. Because like everyone, the French and the English were fighting over, and then Indian terms as well. So like in Wisconsin, for instance, like have you ever heard like Fond du Lac? That's like the Wisconsin like Fond du Lac.
What does that mean?
Fond du Lac.
And what does that mean?
It's a cheese.
Okay.
Well, it's a city now. So.
Oh. Named after the cheese or vice versa?
Like in Wisconsin, there's like almost every city name is either an Indian term, like Oconomowoc, or a French term, because that was like a huge area of the French influence on the history of America.
Yeah, we have all different kinds of influences according to immigration, right? And that
So it broke down the language to the point that it's more complicated. There had to be more rules to account for more variations. So it's harder to learn English.
Yeah, all languages are complex, and it's just a question of our perception, of our point of view, right? So for us, American English is easy because that's what we've been exposed to, right? But for somebody who's looking at it from the outside, they perceive a lot of other influences that make it more complicated.
I was just going to say that my experience is a little different than his because I was in London this summer, and I found it kind of difficult to understand what they were saying.
Oh.
It sounded a little harsh. I really had to pay attention because of the pronunciation of certain vowels, and it sounded not harsh, but very short. Everything was very short, very...
Oh, interesting.
Every syllable or vowel sound was very matter-of-fact. And the way that the accents were on certain vowels, I was like, okay, I didn't want to sound not as educated as them because even someone on the street, theirs sounds very intelligent by the way that they speak. What? You know, I couldn't quite understand, so I just kind of, you know, went by what I thought. But I felt like a second language learner there.
Sure.
In a sense, for a lot of the some of the things that they were saying and how they pronounced some of the words. So my exposure, I guess, California, I call it California casual. When we talk very casual, was completely different in a sense than the way that they speak there in London.
Sure, yeah. And it's funny, too, because as we said at the very beginning, it's all a question of perception, right? So from our background and thinking that we speak very casually, going somewhere else, then we have these perceptions that, oh, they're more formal, they're more educated, they're more precise, they're more this or that, whatever it is, right?
And the wiring, too. You're wired to hear this kind of thing. It's almost like a different language. You're wired to hear it in a certain way, and in Great Britain, it's different.
Yeah, because they said, do you want a quart of tea? I said, art? And they said, you know, and then after that, I was like, okay, wait.
Did you experience like what I noticed when I was in England was that like they would all identify each other based upon the way that almost like the dialect you'd say of the English accent. So they go, oh, you're from New Hampshire, or not? You're from the Hampshire, you're from Berkshire, you're from Lancashire. Because they have like a slight different variation on how they said the same word, and that was in London. It's the biggest city. It's the most melting pot style. There was like
and different classes of society.
Yeah, and all the strata
That's
kind
a
of
good
comes
point.
together.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
And then there's the slang that they use.
It's the same.
Because like they said, like a fag is a cigarette.
Oh.
It's like, oh, you got a fag. Or do you have the loo? Yeah. So and like lorry is a truck.
Yeah.
Boots is a trunk. So
Which is a whole
like,
other
words
situation,
for
right? So we're talking about different vocabulary,
Yeah.
not only
Exactly,
different
for the same
pronunciation, but
things.
there's different vocabulary.
And then when they drink, it's a whole different story too.
Well,
And they drink a lot.
let me just clarify real quick. We do the same thing in the U.S., right? It's not just there, so they can perceive. It's very interesting because London is the largest city and it's very highly densely populated,
It's very
that
diverse.
they can tell the different neighborhood that you're from
Really?
based on your pronunciation.
It's like New York and
Oh, yeah, the
They-
boroughs in New York.
Yeah, in the boroughs in New York, you can tell somebody's from the Bronx, or,
Or Manhattan,
right?
or-
Yes, it's very
Wow.
different. With dense population, people make distinctions based on where they live.
There's a student I called in,
Okay.
and her question's about Schwa, but I'll let her ask.
Okay.
I'll put her on the speaker. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
You're on the speaker with the class and the professor. You can ask your question.
Okay, except she's talking.
Oh, it's because it's delayed. So go ahead and ask.
Oh, I see. Doctor, I have been listening to you online, and I have been looking at the Schwa.
Mm-hmm.
You have 3 words under it. It says about, and paper.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if paper actually fits in that group when you're using the American pronunciation.
Sure. So if we look at paper, how many syllables does paper have in it? 2. And which one is the stressed syllable? The first one, right? So if we divide it into 2 syllables, this one is a diphthong, which we haven't gotten to yet, right? So we have 2 sounds here. We've got A, right? Paper. And then this one is going to be the schwa. So we have 2 syllables. This one is the stressed syllable, and this one is not. In that unstressed syllables, you usually have either schwa or the short I sound. Those are the 2 most common vowel sounds that you find in unstressed syllables. So yeah, it fits in there. Okay, so let's get back to our chart, and what I would like to do then is to just walk through it then quickly and move around it, and I want you to really pay attention to how your tongue moves so that you can use this as a teaching tool to show your students. You're going to say your tongue is high in the back, your lips are rounded and tense in order to be able to make this sound, okay? So let's just kind of go down and around the chart so we can feel our lips. All right, so I'll say the word and you repeat. So if we've got key, bet, but, bird, book. Okay, so can you feel as you go down around how your mouth moves? All right, so there's a couple of tricks that you can use to remember these sounds. So since it's hard to refer to the symbol, you don't want to say this is the I sound because it may be represented by different letters in spelling. There's some fun things that you can say to help people remember them. So the very first one we can call a smiling sound, right? This is the one like cheese that we notice that we say when we want people to smile. And this short sound, we can say it's like a gorilla, right? The sound that a gorilla makes, right? Okay. And we said that schwa was like Friday afternoon, right? Relaxed. And then the long schwa sound would be something horrible, right? So like, ugh, right? Something disgusting. Ugh, bird, right? And then this O sound, this long O sound, we can say either or. You know, like
Which one?
like yeah. So like bored, so, so. This last one on the mid. Oh. And then the long A sound down at the bottom we had as in father. We can say that's kind of like when you're holding a baby. What do you say when you hold a baby? Aww. Right? Aww, father. Okay? So you can kind of use things like that as cues to help you and your students to remember the sounds.
Do you find that musical examples ever are good
Absolutely.
for musical? Like some of the biggest exposure that people have overseas is pop culture, like music or movies, things like that, things they can relate to and get excited about. And musically speaking, too, you can have like musical pathway in your brain and a non-musical pathway in your brain.
And what are you talking about being musical? Are you saying using music as a tool to
Yeah, like
teach?
using like a popular, like maybe they take like a popular song and like a few lines or whatever, and they say, oh yeah, they say, oh we like in Japan for instance, like they loved Queen for years and years and years. You might be able to say like the sound you're looking for, like with this high note, is like best you could play like for a song for them.
Absolutely.
So they go, oh yeah, because then they can hear it and it's something they can identify with.
Sure, that's a wonderful question. There's all different kinds of learners, right? Some people learn by seeing, some people learn by doing, and some people learn by hearing, right? And so people who have a musical talent, you certainly can really appeal to them, and it will make sense. They'll understand, they'll like it, they'll be inspired, they'll be interested. And it sounds like since you're in theater, and I kind of think that maybe like music too, so whatever your passion is, that comes through in your teaching. So if you like music, even if people are not predominantly auditory, it can still be appealing to them because of your experience.
Just real quick, I was going to bring that up 15 minutes ago. I should have done that. But I studied voice, and then I stopped. But when you're studying voice, they have you to practice the vowel sounds.
To warm up, right? That's what I need.
And I just realized that it did change the way that I started speaking and pronouncing my words, because they take you through every single step, stressed, unstressed vowels. I mean, it is amazing how music really can, like you said.
Like the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la.
Yeah, but even more detailed than that, it really will support the pronunciation of different sounds.
Right.
And that's a good point that you brought up. Music is very important, I think, sometimes in pronunciation, articulation.
Exactly. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about articulatory phonetics. We're talking about how to make the sounds. So if you teach people exactly, it's all about body awareness, right? When you learn a sport, when you learn tennis, you know, you have to turn and be sideways to the net and your hand back and you're right, or whatever sport it is. So speaking, it's the same way. We have all this physiognomy that nobody teaches us how to move our tongue when we learn our language, right?
I think we did when we were kids. They did when we were kids.
Do you think?
Some of this is bringing back memories.
Is
when I was,
it?
like, learning this stuff for the first time.
Really?
Yeah. If the research is correct about
it's
as a child,
now.
Hang on just one sec. Let's go one at a time. What were you saying?
If the research is correct about the physiology in the brain and neural pathways, that at certain age it stops. I mean, there's that openness where we can listen, hear all kinds of sounds that I cannot even.
But you can construct those neural pathways later. It doesn't mean that it's not impossible.
Yeah, I know it's not, but it's not as quick as.
No, it's not.
So that's the point I'm trying to make, is that there was certain time as a child, as maybe a baby, well, I guess one or 2 years. What is the age that it gets cut off? Maybe 1 or 2 years old?
Yeah, it starts to slow down about when you start to speak. So around 1 or 2 is when it starts to slow down. They say that you become kind of totally solidified in your mother tongue if you're only exposed to one language around puberty.
Right. So my first name had a roll of R and a Ch, my birth name. And in 20 years, I've never, only one person, English-speaking person, could pronounce it. I changed it. I was just like, not
Give that.
I'm not even going to try it because people are going to say, oh, let me try it. Let me say, okay, I'll do it now that I said it. Favreau. See? Don't say that. No, I'm not trying to be impolite because I never hear it. Now I change it to Ross. It's still a Persian name, and I like the meaning. But the thing is, as a child, you know, and there are certain words in Chinese, or I think I was working with a Vietnamese child, and he had all these different names, family, and I wanted to say it, I couldn't say it. It just maybe.
Well, there's 2 aspects. There's
there's a teacher who trained me.
Of course.
Then I can say
of course.
But I couldn't say
you
it right on the spot.
You can learn it, right? Just like your students can learn it, but it takes practice.
Yeah, I couldn't do it on the spot. And,
you're not going to be an excellent tennis player.
And I had the same tendency as you had. I just wanted to try it, and I did 3 times, and I said, okay, it's just like somebody's saying my name and I'm not hearing it, and I just stop. And
so there's
just
real quick, there's two different aspects. There's the articulation, there's the way of saying it, and as these are muscles, they get atrophied if you don't use them. So it takes time to practice with it. Like, you're not going to be a great tennis player when you first start. You need to learn and practice and be consistent. Otherwise, you won't develop the ability to make that sound. And at the same time, you're developing the ability to perceive it, right? So there's two things going on.
When it comes to language learning, I'm going to cite first the Cummings theory, which refers to the cognitive academic language proficiency and the basic interpersonal communication skills. Age is a very, very significant factor when it comes to learning, acquiring sounds of the second language. I learned sound of English as a second language. So the phonological component of any language could only be approximated by the person learning that second language. We could not actually produce the exact sound, especially if that sound is not commonly used in our first language. So practice is essential. When it comes to the variable of age, an adult learner of second language could basically, produce the syntactical component of the language perfectly, but when it comes to the phonological component, we could only approximate it. I could only approximate the sound of English, but ask me how to write in English. And I can write, modesty aside, probably academically, I would probably say like better than, the regular, academic writers. And if you read my writing, you could never say that it was written by a person who learned English as a second language. Phonological, we can only approximate it. So that's it. And then basically when we teach our students the sounds of the language, we have to be aware also of the two components of the usage of the language, whether it is for basic interpersonal communication or for academic purposes.
I think that's a good point, actually, because I know when I was taking language in college, I knew how to write and read it better than I could speak it. Because, and they, of course, at the higher levels, they wanted us to speak only French in class or speak only Spanish in class. I never got to that level. But the people that really went on to the linguistic majors, they went to the country, and because they had to speak, and they had to figure out what they didn't know, the words they didn't know, the vocabulary they didn't have, and they heard it all the time, and they had to express their thoughts in that language only to the people around them. They really, their ability to speak it like just went astronomically higher because they were actually able to, because it was the immersion in the whole culture of the language itself, the thought processes of the language itself.
That makes sense.
And once you reach a certain age level, like 12 or 15, and expose the second language, you could never speak like the native speaker in terms of the phonological component. But bringing a child here from another country whose language is different from English, and after 6 months, you'll be surprised. They could produce the sound actually perfectly language.
And the accent, you pick up the accent as well.
Just to comment on what he said, what's your goal, right? Do you want to be able to communicate? That's generally our goal, right? We want to be able to communicate in another language. Some people have an unrealistic goal of wanting to speak like a native speaker, which is probably not going to happen. I never like to say never, that it's impossible. I have seen people as adult second language learners who have gotten pretty close, really good. It depends on the person, it depends on your ability, it depends on the effort, it depends on how much you work on it. So it can happen, but is it necessary? Is it required? Not really. Some people, in fact, prefer to maintain some of their accent because that's part of their identity. It's who they are. It's their home. It's their first language. It means a lot to who you are. So I don't know that we want to aim at being a perfect native speaker. And the other important point is that frequently we are teachers of a language that was not our first language. So in your case, you're a wonderful English teacher. English is not your first language, but does that inhibit you from being an excellent professional? No, right? You can still communicate, it doesn't matter. And moreover, it makes you a wonderful example for your students, right? Because look at me, I'm a second language learner, and look at what I've done with this language and what I've been able to do. So I think that's the message that you want to transmit. You don't want people to get frustrated because they're not able to obtain perfection. What's perfection? What model are you using? Does it really matter? Not really. We want to be able to communicate well. Of course, we always want to improve. The more we can sound natural, the better. Wonderful, okay? But you know, it's just like there's so many things to work on vocabulary and acquiring writing skills. There's so many areas, and this is one.
What are your thoughts about, unless you're teaching a class strictly on pronunciation, there's the whole issue of effective filter. I know for me, I'm learning French, and at what point do you, I mean, you want your students to be verbal and to speak. And we had a class about when to correct. And what are your thoughts about pronunciation and effective filter?
Right.
The balance.
So it's very important to do it in a loving, kind, friendly, helpful way. Everything that you teach, not only pronunciation, but everything, right? So if you're presenting it in an enthusiastic, fun way where you're talking about music, and that transmits, you know? So if you correct people in a loving way, they can accept it, usually. Everybody's different. Everybody's an individual. There are ways of doing it without calling somebody out. Like you can just write it on the board and say, I've been hearing a lot of this ing stuff going on today. Let's take a look at this. So you're not identifying any one person as making a mistake. You can have students, once they learn the pronunciation, is to help correct each other. So they become more aware of it and start to perceive it. So on the, we'll get to this in a minute, but there's some pronunciation games that we can use. So you can make it light and fun. It doesn't need to be so heavy and such a serious goal that I have to be perfect, because then people get nervous and then they're really not going to attain it because it's too difficult. So I think that it needs to be done commonly. You need to see it as part of the routine. That makes it easier instead of like, oh God, we're going to do symbols and we haven't seen them in 6 months, right? It's hard. So if you make it part of your routine, it makes it easier to accept.
Would you say that a good way to start them is to have your students kind of identify what their goal is in any given class that they're taking? Like,
perhaps.
At least maybe a stepping stone, at least like an ultimate goal and maybe a stepping stone goal, so that they have an idea of what to measure their success in the class.
It's a good idea because at least you get them thinking about it, because they might not have consciously set out in their mind, this is my goal, this is where I want to get to. And so you can get them thinking about that. But then I think it's also important to make it realistic. So if they say they want to be perfect, you might let them know that you don't want to discourage them and say, oh, you'll never do that, that's impossible, you're a second language learner. But at the same time, you might want to just bring it into balance and say, well, these are the steps that we can use to get there. Focus on those instead of being overwhelming and them becoming more afraid to do it. You've had a question for a while.
Yeah, just a simple question. This chart here is essentially for English pronunciation.
Yes.
Are there any facsimiles for other languages, for instance, Vietnamese? Would they have?
I'm sure there are, yes. So the International Phonetic Alphabet has all the symbols from all the languages in the world. So any speech sound that we make can be represented by a symbol. So each language would then pick and choose those symbols that are used in that language. So I'm not sure, like I personally don't know of reference materials for that language, but I'm sure that they exist.
So far as I know, the IPA, actually the sounds in the IPA chart represent all the sounds around the world. So regardless of the language, the sound could be represented, or a specific sound could be represented by any of these symbols.
But there are other symbols. These are only the symbols that we use in English. There are other symbols, like you guys have been talking about French. So in Persian, they have some of these R sounds that are really hard for English language speakers to, right? So there's other symbols, and I can't remember. I think it's like a backwards R. That's a forwards R, right?
Yep.
Yeah, something like. Wait, let me try again. Something like that to represent that, right? It's a back R. There's
the ro,
yeah.
Ro, and then there's a hair right next to each other.
See, so, and I don't dominate those sounds, but yeah, there's all these other symbols like this, and they show these other sounds that we won't even deal with because I can't even demonstrate them, right? And our goal here is to have tools to teach English, right?
And the sound R, which is represented by letter R, the rough-like sound actually could be produced in different manner. There are some languages actually that emphasizes the R sound for English. We just like, raise the back of our tongues. It's called retroflex, but in other languages it's a like,
sure.
It becomes alveolar rather than retroflex, but it's still the same sound.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we? Did you want to say something else?
No, just real quick. With the IPA, as a teacher of teaching a second language learner, how will we use this? I mean, is it for a tool for the teacher to be able to teach a student pronunciation, how to emphasize certain sounds, or this wouldn't be for the student per se, it would be for the educator to study this?
Okay, so it depends a little bit on who your population is. If you're working with young children, I probably wouldn't introduce it because they're learning the letters to be able to learn how to read and write, and it would just add another confusing layer. So until kids are maybe in 6th grade, I don't think that I would use it. I would use it for myself as a teacher. Okay. Beyond 6th grade, they can handle it. They've gotten solid enough in English, reading and writing, that you could introduce it to represent sounds. So for younger learners, you could use things like what we were talking, like the gorilla sound or the baby sound, right? So you could use other tools to teach it as opposed to using the symbol itself. So let's look quickly at some ways to use these. If you want to look at the back of your handout, on the very last page, you had some games. So on the very last page, you have some games. And so these are some things that you can do to work with the symbols more. So, of course, this is going to be a little bit more time-consuming because you're going to need to teach them all of this, right? So they have to understand all of the vowel sounds and how to make diphthongs. And we didn't even get into consonants yet, but you have to teach them how to make consonants if you want to work with all of these, right? But these are some ideas of ways to make it fun so that they can learn these symbols and then use it as a tool to become more independent learners. Then they can get a dictionary, open the dictionary, and check the pronunciation, right? So that's the reason for using the symbols. So you want to take the pressure off and teach it as something light and fun. Just introduce it very slowly, one symbol a week, or something to incorporate into your lesson plans, but make it consistent. Right, so that it's not overwhelming and it's not something that gets taught and lost. All right, so you have games like bingo, what you could do. So with this bingo chart, for example, the way it is here, they've got some free squares, right? So the blank ones are free squares. And you can have students, each student has their own bingo sheet, and you can call out words, and they have to cross off the one that they've got on their sheet, and then the first one to get a blackout or whatever you determine will shout out bingo, and they win. You could have students play in pairs, and so that you've got words on cards, and they'll look at the word, and then they have to determine which sound is in that word, and then they'll mark it off on their card. So you can get them working with each other to correct each other's pronunciation and become aware of it. Same idea with what they call in British English noughts and crosses. So I wanted to show you the book that I got this from. I got these activities from this book, which is Gerald Kelly's How to Teach Pronunciation. This is my favorite book for teaching pronunciation. It's very easy to read and easy to understand and good explanations. It's the best one that I've found that uses IPA, so I really recommend this book. The author is Gerald Kelly. It's G-E-R-A-L-D-O-K-E-L-L-Y.
Now let's use IPA to spell it.
Right.
How to teach pronunciation. There's a whole series. They've got how to teach listening, how to teach speaking.
Does that have activities in it?
It does. So that's where I got these games
Okay,
from.
yeah.
Yeah, so they came from here. So you can work with intonation. So he goes into the other features too. What we've been looking at today when you look at just the sounds is what we call the segmental features. That's when you break a word down into little components, and that's what we're studying today, our individual sounds of how to articulate these sounds. But he also gets into what we call the suprasegmental. The suprasegmental features of the language, and we talked a little bit about that when we talked about syllables and syllable stress. So when you get into suprasegmental is when you start to get into intonation, and you can use these arrows. So when you make a question, if your voice goes up or goes down at the end of the sentence. When we talked about word stress, this is a suprasegmental feature. But when you're talking about just different isolated sounds, those are segmental features. So he does get into that too. So you can study how to teach sentence stress and word stress and how to deal with those reductions when we talked about how you doing or something like that. When in connected speech, how it gets, how we tend to clip words at the end or change sounds according to the environment. So we're about out of time. It's 11:25. If you like, we can get into diphthongs, or if you prefer, we can just kind of end with a little bit of Q&A. What would you like to do? Would you like to see diphthongs? You want to see them? Okay, great. So let's look at these a little bit. So the diphthongs, as we said before, are a combination of two vowel sounds. And it can also be called a glide because it's a movement from one vowel sound to the other. And a diphthong is treated as one vowel sound because it occurs in one syllable. So even though there are kind of two sounds, but they blend together. So they occur in one syllable. So the first one we have, like if you're tugging on your ear and you say A. So here, ear, it would be the sound, like as in fierce. So if you look at your vowel chart, you can see in this first diphthong, we're moving from that short I sound to the schwa sound. So it's going to be what we call a centering movement. You're moving from high to low. So if you say a word like fierce, can you feel your tongue move? Ear, fierce, right? So it's going from very high to mid. The next one would be A, like what? A, right? So if you have a word like cake, we're going up. So we're going from the schwa up to the short I. A. So the the first one went, oh, it goes from eh to up. Sorry, so we're going from here. I'm looking at it upside down. So you're going from A. So it's going from front to a little bit back in your mouth, right? You're moving back a little bit. A, so then if we have this one, this is like tour, right? Tour, obscure, sure, right? Tour. So you're moving from the oo to the schwa, So this one again is centering. So this first line is all centering, and these are all rising. They're closing, so they're moving up towards I. And these ones are centering towards schwa. Okay? And down here you have like where, air. So moving from into schwa, where. And then back here we have O, like go, right? O. So this O in isolation isn't on your chart. This is only found in the diphthong, O, go. If you were to write it in the vowel chart, it would be right about here. Okay? It's between this long O sound like board and the long U sound like book. Like food, sorry, not book. Book is this one. So it would be right here in between O, all right? So you're going to move from O to the short U. So if you had a word like go, right? And so you notice that your lips kind of round too, right? Oh, go. And then here we have ow, right? Like as in house, ow. You slam your finger in the door, ow, right? Ow. So we also do not have just this letter A on your chart in isolation. So if that were to be written on your chart, it would be down here, in between the little hat, as in but, and the ah, as in father. It's in between those two, okay? So if we're thinking about our mouth, right, it's a little bit more forward than this ah and father. Ow. So let's go through these words here on the diphthong chart and practice them and feel how your tongue moves, okay? So fierce, fierce, beard, Ian, here, and then we'll go down. Tour, obscure, sure, and then moving down. Where, scare, dare, there, and then we'll start with the ones that go up to I. So cake, paid, face, way. So you might want to make gestures. You might want to show, like where it moves on the chart. If you've got the vowel chart, you can put it up on your board. You can have it inside a mouth, and you can just show the movement using these arrows where it glides from. Right. So we've got oi, boy, a boy, voice, toy, and then we've got I, high. Tie, by, and kite. We've got that ow sound, right? So go, most, toast, and home. So once again, to talk about a British English difference, I colored this in because in British English they use the schwa, so it's oh, right? No. Go, right? And so it's more of a schwa to the oo, whereas in American English, we round this out. It becomes more of o. And then at the bottom, we've got ow. Loud, house, gown, bow, ow. Any questions there? So do you want to look at consonants really quickly? So we can just get an idea of how consonants are different than vowels, right? So in the consonants, what was the very first thing that we said that makes consonants different from vowels?
No arrows.
So we're going to start looking at where the air is obstructed in order to make consonants, okay? So the way that this chart is organized, once again, it works with your mouth. So the symbols that are here up in the front, these are what we call bilabial, because you have two lips and the two lips are touching. That's the place of articulation. So with consonants, there's two things that we want to look at. We want to look at the place of articulation and the manner. So the manner is the how the sound is made. So these ones at the front, they're bilabial. That's the place where the air is obstructed. And then if we look at if you want to now look at this one, if you want to make notes here, it might be easier. This is a little bit bigger. So this is a pull out of the first section. So we'll go across the top line. So these are generally found in pairs. So we have P and B. So these two have the same place of articulation, right? They're both bilabial. And the manner is what we call a plosive. It's like a little explosion. It's a puff of air. B, P, right? So you have the air stops at your lips and then pops out. So these are a pair. They have the same place and the same manner. But there's something different about them, though. They're still not exactly the same, right? What's different between them? So we have voicing, right? So we have, one is voiced, and so the singers in here know that your vocal folds are vibrating when you have a voiced sound, and when you have an unvoiced sound, the vocal folds are not vibrating, right? So when you say, you can put your hand here on your throat and feel the difference. Say, no vibration. B, 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 down here. So real easy tool you can show your students, right? Put your hands up, right? We talked about how to do syllables. This is the easiest way to teach syllables. Feel it. When does it move? Put your hand on your throat. Is there voicing? Is there not? Okay? So then when we move back in the chart a little bit, we can talk about the next pair. And we've got T and D, right? So we can look at all three of these things. So the place changed a little bit. It moved a little bit back in our mouth, right? P and B were bilabial. T and D. Where does the air stop? Just behind your teeth, right? So your tongue is touching behind your teeth. So if these are your teeth, then you've got kind of like that little bump there, right? So this is what we call the alveolar ridge. Kind of like a little cliff there behind your teeth, right? So your tongue is touching right up here on the alveolar ridge. So that's the place where the air gets stopped. And the manner is the same, right? It's still a little explosion, but what changed was the place. So instead of B, we've got D, right? So it's still a plosive, and we still have a pair, one voiced and one unvoiced. So T, is it voiced or unvoiced? T, unvoiced. And D, D, D is voiced, right? So you can feel the vibration in that. And then if you take your next chart, because this is a continuation, so moving back in our mouth, we're going to move to the next sound. So this is a combination of two sounds. This is ch, right? Like as in church, okay? Ch, ch. So can you feel that your tongue moves back a little bit more? If you say t, ch, moves back a little bit, doesn't it? Yeah? It's still on the hard palate. It's still the bony ridge in your mouth, right? If you take your tongue and go back further, you can feel where it starts to get soft back here. We have the soft palate. There's no bone above that, right? That's where your nasal cavities start. So our tongue is still here on the hard palate. So it's close, right? It's not really, it's not like pointing straight up like a tree. It's just a little bit past the alveolar ridge. So you can call this place of articulation. The second one for t and d, we called alveolar. That's the adjective to describe where the sound is taking place. It takes place at the alveolar ridge when you say t and d. When you move back to make ch or j, we have something that's palato-alveolar. Not sure if I spelled that right. Did I spell that right? T-A? Okay, so it's kind of in between the two, in between the palate and the alveolar ridge. So that's for ch and j. And you notice here that we have two symbols together. It's not just one, it's a combination symbol. So this is rare. These are the only two consonants in English that are represented by two symbols together. So it's a combination.
So J like joke?
J like junk, Julie, judge, j, j. So this is ch, like in chair, and j, as in judge. Okay?
That could be for like ridge.
Ridge at the end, exactly.
So when it's a deep G.
DG, usually spelled with DG. So the manner is a combination of two. And this is what we call an affricate. So an affricate is a combination of two sounds. Let's move down one row just to see these sounds. If we look at s and z, these are what we call fricatives. S and z. A fricative, yes, exactly, sounds like friction. So you can hear the friction of the air moving over that place of articulation. Okay? So psst. With fricatives, you can hold them for as long as you have air in your lungs. Right? Psst. Can you do that with p? It's one explosion, it's one pop, then it's done. Right? Fricatives you can hold for a long time. So at the very beginning, we talked about the difference between vowels and consonants, and we said generally vowels you can hold, right? Well, this is a consonant that you can hold, so it does happen. So an affricate is a combination. It's a fricative plus a t. We saw what this was before. What? Talking about the manner of articulation, we talked about p and b. Those were called? What was the manner for p and b?
Voiced and unvoiced.
Not that, not voicing. So there's three different things we can look at.
Plosive.
It's a plosive. It's a little explosion, right? So t, d. If we go back here to our first chart, all four of these on the top, these are all plosives. Okay? B, t, d. They're all little explosions. The place changes a little bit, because these two are bilabial and these two are alveolar. So we're moving back in our mouth. Yeah?
We have to be aware that some linguists label plosives as stops because there is a complete stoppage of the air before we release the air to produce that sound. So both actually refer to the same concept or idea.
Mm-hmm. We're actually stopping the air, whereas in it doesn't stop, right? It continues. So it can be called a continuant, right?
Would M be considered a plosive to
Is there an explosion there? Money. Can keep going.
nasal?
It's not a plosive. There only these four are plosives. Only these four. Okay. So with the affricate, we had, it's a palatal alveolar, these the ch and j. And it's an affricate because it's a combination of a fricative plus a plosive. So we had t and d plus the fricative of sh and j. So we'll get into these in just a second, okay, and how to make these affricates. And once again, we have a voiceless and voiced pair. So ch, is there voicing? Ch, ch, no voicing, it's voiceless. And j, judge, voicing. Voiceless, voiced. So they always come in pairs like that. Voiceless, voiced, voiceless, voiced. Okay? And then moving back in our mouth, we can get to k and g. And g. So the back of the tongue is raised. Okay? So that touches the soft palate. All right? So those are what we call velar. Velar is referring to this back part of your mouth, the velum. The velum is another word for the soft palate. Okay? So we're pretty much out of time, but this gives you a taste of how to work with consonants. Okay? The same thing is going to happen on the second line. I'll use the composite chart so that you can see. I'll just go through these really quickly so that you can see. So once again, we start at the front of our mouth. And these are all fricatives on the second row. So on the first row, we had all plosives except for those two that are affricates, that were a combination of a plosive plus a fricative. The second row are all fricatives, friction, right? Where you can hear the friction of the air flowing over the articulators, the places where the air stops. So if you have, it's dental, labial, right? Your teeth touch your bottom lip. And all of the fricatives you can hold for a long time, right? Same place of articulation, but voiced, right? So we have, and then moving back, we have lingual dental, as in with, right? With. And we have these. It's the same TH sound, but with voicing. So this is frequently a problem with English language learners, right? This is a hard sound. It's not common in other languages. It's very common in English. So frequently people have a strange feeling about sticking their tongue between their teeth and saying something. They're afraid they're going to spit on you, right? So this is one of those ones where there's a high affective filter, right? It looks silly. I've got my tongue out of my mouth. I'm going to spray you. So now this is one that you can work with so that people don't feel so silly making the sound. It can cause a lot of problems, right, if you switch it for something else.
So what was the sound of that?
These are both TH sounds. So the first one is with no voicing, as in with. And the second one is as in these, those. It has voicing. Then moving back, we have s and z. Right, so another pair, we talked about those. So you feel your tongue moving back, zzz, right? So your tongue is on that alveolar ridge, right? So it's alveolar fricative, voiced and unvoiced. No voicing, zzz, voiced. And then moving back, we have, anybody know what this sound makes? Shh, like shoe, right? Shh. And we have je, je. This is not a common sound in English. We only have it in the middle of words, like rouge, in the middle or the end, right? Rouge, measure, je. This can cause trouble too sometimes. And then at the bottom, we've kind of got a mix. So the first three are nasals. You have the bilabial, so once again at the front of your mouth, both lips together, air comes out through the nose, so it's a nasal. All of the nasals are voiced. what would you say the place of articulation for is? Is it different from is bilabial, and is alveolar. Your tongue is touching behind your teeth. Your air is still coming out through your nose, but it changes the sound because your tongue moved, right? So it changed the timbre for vibration. It's smaller now. And then this is that one we saw in ing, right? Ing. So this one is, what's the place of articulation? Good. It's on the velum, so we call it velar. It's a velar sound, right? So right? Bilabial, alveolar, velar. And then ul and these can be really tricky too. They're really hard for second language learners. Frequently students who have Chinese, Japanese, Korean as their first language have a lot of difficulty with these sounds. These are called liquids. They kind of flow somewhat like a vowel. And we talked about the different R's in different languages. So we talked about the R within the back of your mouth and the one with the trill. So these can be difficult. So you have ol and right? And then we have w, and y. Okay? So w, these are what we call semi-vowels because it doesn't really stop the airflow, right? You've got w, there's nothing really touching, but your lips come so close together that it almost stops the air. So w, will you do this? Would you? And y, as in yes. So it's velar, the back of your tongue is up. So anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I think that what we can do is we can start a forum or something, so if you have questions, please feel free to send them in and we'll answer them online and we'll get a chat going. So as you start to work with this, questions will come up. Try and incorporate it into your lesson plans. Look at dictionaries, become more and more familiar with the sounds. Teach your students how to use the sounds, and have fun with it. I hope it goes well for you, and thank you for coming today.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming. If you guys have any questions, make sure you guys email us or call us about the form that she's talking about. We can set it up. So if you guys do want to do that, we can set it up right now. I already start posting some of the tips that she's giving on the YouTube link. You guys can ask for that later. We can give that to you as well. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm late. I got caught up.